and listening effectively. However, we don't get any training in how to listen. We're taught how to read. We have classes in speaking skills and writing skills. But how many people have had any formal training when it comes to listening? Very, very few. We take it for granted. We think that everyone can listen. I'm a good listener. One of the number one characteristic or qualification that employers are looking for, and by the way, saying that they're not getting in recent college graduates, listening skills that we are producing, and that's not just Somerset Community College, but colleges across the country. We are producing graduates that don't listen effectively, have not developed those listening skills. So what's going on? What's happening? If that's what they're looking for, and what they keep telling us is, you're doing a fantastic job teaching them the technical skills. They can run the software, they can run the equipment, they can do this, but their listening skills are horrible. So what's going on? What's happening? I think part of the problem is that we confuse listening and hearing. Listening and hearing. What's the difference between the two?
Hearing is actually just what's going on inside your ear. You can pick up pitches, sounds, volumes,
Okay.
frequencies, all that. But listening, you're taking that and you're comprehending what is
Okay.
being said.
Comprehension. Give me another word for taking it in. You said hearing, you're just taking it in. What's the book used? Do you remember? Receiving. Yeah. The hearing is a biological function. Let's put physiological. That sounds better. A physiological function. It's very passive. It just happens. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be involved in any process to hear. If you're born with everything working properly, you don't get sick, you don't get a fever, you don't have an injury, you can hear. Everybody can hear. It's a physiological function. And it does just stop at the receiving part of the process. That's it. That's really all that's involved with hearing, is picking up that aural stimuli. We can hear. It's very passive. It just happens. Listening, on the other hand, is a skill. Okay, now, we throw that word around an awful lot. I've used it several times in the last couple of chapters, talking about different communication skills. What does that mean? Well, if something's a skill, that means that we have to learn it. We have to develop it. It has to be taught to us. We learn how to listen. So what kind of listening training did you get? Be quiet, listen to me. I'm talking now. We don't get any formal training when it comes to listening. We're told what not to do. We're told to listen, but we're really not given any formal training when it comes to listening. We learn to listen. It is a skill. And like any skill, it can be sharpened, it can be strengthened. You all are probably very, very good listeners. Although it didn't show up on that quiz we just took. You're probably pretty good listeners. But the best listeners in the world can still get better. It's like a muscle. They can sharpen and strengthen those skills, make them more effective. You all have muscle. You don't have guns like these, but you all have muscles. You can make that muscle stronger and more effective. Same thing with your listening skills. So no matter how good a listener you are now, hopefully as we go through this chapter and we talk about the different listening behaviors and we talk about things that get in the way of effective listening, you'll be able to sharpen those skills. So listening is a skill. It has to be learned, it has to be taught, and it's an active process. And I'm going to underline the word active because it's key. You do have to decide to listen. You have to involve yourself in the listening process. It is very, very active. It doesn't just happen. So hearing is passive, listening is very active. Okay, now I'm going to give you a heads up for your notes, and we'll start right off the bat with this so that they'll be clear. There are 3 lists of 5 in this chapter. There are the 5 steps in the listening process. 5 steps in the listening process, the 5 types of listening, and the 5 reasons or purposes for listening. So I want to get those 3 lists of 5 right off the bat today, taken care of today, so they're real clear in your notes. My concern is I don't want you to mix them up when you take the test, because they will be on the test. We're going to start with the 5 steps in the listening process. Then we'll have the 5 types of listening, and then we will have the 5 purposes or reasons for listening. So make sure they're clear in your notes which one we're doing, which one we're talking about. Now you might notice we didn't really start out with a definition of listening. Your book really doesn't give a clear definition. It kind of describes listening as an active process of receiving, understanding, evaluating, remembering, and responding to, and this, here's what I'm going to change up something. In the book, they say that listening is an active process of receiving, understanding, evaluating, remembering, and responding to oral stimuli. And I want you to know that term, oral stimuli. What does oral mean? A-U-R-A-L. What does that mean? What kind of stimulus would oral stimuli be? Any guesses? We're just talking about sounds. Oral means sounds. And I don't like that. I don't think that that's a very accurate description of what's taking place in the listening process. Oral stimuli means sounds. People are talking and we're receiving that, we're understanding that, we're processing, evaluating that. I think very good listeners respond to the oral stimuli, but they respond to both verbal and nonverbal stimuli. If you're a good listener, and you think about the people that you know that are good listeners, easy to talk to, you love to get together with them and just talk, have conversation, they're good listeners. They don't just listen to the words. They consider the context. They consider the nonverbals as well. The tone of your voice, how you're sitting, your facial expressions, what came before, what came after. A good listener considers both the verbal and the nonverbal stimuli. So we just killed 2 birds with 1 stone. We described listening, what takes place in the listening process, and we've listed the 5 steps or stages in the listening process. Here they are. 1, 2, 3, did I get them all? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So under 5 steps or stages in the listening process, You want to have your first list of 5, receiving, understanding, evaluating, remembering, and responding are the 5 steps or stages in the listening process. We good? The second list of 5 that we're going to talk about is not in your book. It will absolutely positively be on the chapter test, and it will be on the final. So what I'm saying is get this in your notes. These are the 5 types of listening. Now, when I was in grad school, we took a course on listening. We had to memorize, we had to know these 5 types of listening, and we had to know them in the order that they occur. We couldn't just memorize the 5 types. We had to know the order in which they occur. So we used, what do they call that? A mnemonic device. Have you ever heard that term? Mnemonic device? Mnemonic device is something that helps you remember a list. So we developed a mnemonic device, or used a mnemonic device, found a mnemonic device to help us remember the 5 types of listening. We drew out the list in the shape of a tree, the listening tree, we called it all the time, to help us remember the order in which they occur. Now, you don't have to, I'm not going to ask you to draw a tree on the exam, on the chapter test or on the final, but you do need to know these and the order that they occur. So because I'm a creature of habit, I'm going to put them in the shape of a tree. You don't have to know the tree. Before we listen any other way, first type of listening, before we listen any other way, I'm going to put it down here as the roots, we first have to listen discriminatively. Discriminative listening is the first type of listening. Before we listen any other way, we first have to listen discriminatively. Can you see that okay? Does that green show up okay? I can switch to a darker color if I need to. Before we listen any other way, we first have to listen discriminatively. And I've said that like 4 times. Great fill-in-the-blank question. Before we listen any other way, we first have to listen discriminatively. So what does that mean? Discriminative listening has to come first. By definition, by description, by nature, we have to first listen discriminatively before we listen any other way, because discriminative listening is when we make a decision to listen, when we choose to listen. Okay, he said this is going to be on the test. He said this isn't in the textbook. I better pay attention to this and get this in my notes. That's discriminative listening. This is when we start putting in some effort. This is when we involve ourselves in the listening process. Now, we've got the air conditioner going. That fan's blowing. In a minute, Roger's going to drive by on the lawnmower and go by the window. A discriminative listener is shutting all that out. You don't even really notice it because you're focusing on the information that you want to listen to. The verbal and nonverbal stimuli that you need to get a good grade on the course, in the course. You want to pass this test. You want to do a good job, so you're going to focus. You're tired. You've been working all night. You're dead tired, but you're going to stay awake because you know that this is on the test and it's on the final. You're listening discriminatively. That knucklehead sitting next to you keeps pestering you, keeps bothering you, and you're ignoring them. You're getting a text message and you're ignoring it. That's discriminative listening. Making the decision, making the effort to listen. Okay, so that's the roots of the tree. Discriminative listening. Now we're going to do the trunk of the tree, which is number 2, comprehensive listening. Comprehensive listening. That's the trunk of the tree. Has to come second. We first choose to listen, we listen discriminatively, and then we have to listen comprehensively. Doesn't matter what kind of listening you're doing, what's going on, what the context is, because you have to listen comprehensively. That's where we apply meaning and understanding to the message. Remember way back in chapter 1 we talked about decoding the message? That's what's going on in number 2. We're listening comprehensively. We're applying meaning and understanding to the message. We're applying meaning and understanding to the message. We're decoding the message. Now, if you're not getting it, this is where you raise your hand and you ask questions, or you move to the front, or whatever, so that you are able to apply meaning and understanding to the message. So that's number 2. Now we can go out into the branches of the tree, and these, it really doesn't matter. Once we get the first 2 out of the way, it really doesn't matter the order of these branches, but we'll put number 3 as therapeutic, or sometimes referred to as listening to help. Therapeutic or listening to help. Now we've listened discriminatively, we've applied meaning and understanding to what we're hearing, what we're listening to. Therapeutic listening is when someone's talking to you, they come to you, and you can tell they want advice. They want your opinion on something. They want you to suggest something. What do you think I should do? Man, I'm in a pickle. I got to do. And they want your opinion. They want your advice on something. That's one type of therapeutic listening. Is when you can tell they kind of want your advice. They kind of want your opinion. They want your help on something, a suggestion from you. The other type of therapeutic listening we call a sounding board. A sounding board. These are, and you've done this for friends, where you're just there so they can vent. They really don't want you to say anything. They don't want any kind of response from you, really. They just need someone to listen. Just someone to be there so they can vent. That would be therapeutic listening, listening to help. So any kind of counseling would be therapeutic listening. Support group, that would be therapeutic listening, listening to help. They want advice, want suggestions, or they just want you to be there so they can vent. Just be there as a sounding board. That would be therapeutic listening or listening to help. Okay, so let's branch off a little bit here. That was 3, so this would be 4. Critical or evaluative listening. Critical or evaluative listening. And either one is appropriate. It just depends on textbooks and professors who you're talking to. It's accepted either way, critical or evaluative. Critical or evaluative listening is when you're listening very closely, you're making a decision about what you're listening to. You're making a decision about what you're listening to. Is it good or bad? Do I like it or not? Is it right for me? Any kind of job interview, the person asking the questions, doing the interviewing, should be listening critically or evaluatively. If you're trying to decide if you're going to download a song and you're kind of listening to it in cue, listening to the little few seconds of it to see if you like it, if you're really listening to it to see if you like it, if you want to buy it, that would be critical or evaluative listening. In speech class, or any time when you're assigning a grade to someone, that would be critical or evaluative listening. I started to say in speech class, when students get up and give speeches and I evaluate them, give them a grade, that would be critical or evaluative listening. someone trying to sell you a car, sell you anything, and you're listening to them to see if this is going to be right for you, is this what I wanted, that would be critical or evaluative listening. Anytime you're making a choice or a decision about something, that would be critical or evaluative listening. So we've got 4 of them up there. What are we missing? What type of listening do we not have up here? You guys do this a lot, I'm sure. This type of listening. Probably did it in your car on the way here this morning. Any ideas what we're missing? How about for fun? Just for the heck of it. Listening to music, listening to the radio. So number 5 is sometimes called for fun, enjoyment, entertainment. Those are the most common terms I've seen for number 5. For fun, for enjoyment, for entertainment. Just listening to something for the heck of it, to relax. Listening to the radio on your way to school. Listening to a comedian on TV or whatever. Some people use those nature tapes, nature CDs to relax or whatever. That would be listening for enjoyment, for entertainment. Some people will do that with a good speaker or a good sermon, just to relax, just for the heck of it. Now, what's important about number 5, and you need to know for number 5, an important characteristic of listening for enjoyment or listening for entertainment is that of the 5 types of listening, it's the most passive. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort by definition. That's why you're doing it. You still have to involve yourself in the listening process, but it usually does not take a whole heck of a lot of work to listen for enjoyment. Of the 5 types of listening, listening for fun, for enjoyment, for entertainment is the most passive. It takes the least amount of effort. That's why you're doing it. Okay? We first have to listen discriminatively, then comprehensively, then we can branch on into the other 3. Make sure you have those in your notes and make sure you underline or highlight types. These are the steps, stages. Steps or stages in the listening process. These are the 5 types of listening. Underline that in your notes. Now the 5 purposes or reasons for listening. And I put purposes or reasons because they refer to them both ways, and I'm trying to remember as I was reviewing this, if they refer to them as purposes in the book and then reasons on the outline or the other way around. But at least in your chapter, they refer to them as purposes or reasons for listening. Why are we listening in the first place? What does listening accomplish? And these are pretty simple. The 5 types of reasons. 5 types of reasons for listening are to learn, to relate, in other words, to interact, to socialize, to learn, to relate, to influence or persuade, to learn, to relate, to influence, to play, for fun, for relate, to influence, play, and to help, to assist. Those are the 5 types, or I'm sorry, the 5. I messed up myself. 5 purposes or reasons for listening. And I wanted to get those 3 lists of 5 in your notes right off the bat this morning so we don't get them mixed up, don't get them confused on the test. When you're taking the test, make sure you're putting the right list in when I ask you for the 5 steps or stages or the 5 types or the 5 purposes or reasons. And they may be different on the final. Maybe I'll only ask for these 2 on the chapter test and these 2, now I always ask for the types on the, or these 2 on the final. 5 types will probably be on both. So make sure you're putting the right list in. Okay. So we've got our 3 lists of 5. All right, let's start with, start in on, not sure which I want to go to first. Let's go obstacles and barriers first. Obstacles and barriers to effective listening. This is the biggest list in the chapter. Once we get through this, it's downhill. These are the obstacles or barriers to effective listening. These are the things that get in the way. We talked about being a good listener, and that the people in this class are probably very good listeners. You have to be. You have to become a good listener to continue and to be successful in college. You have to develop those listening skills. Some of the skills that you develop, you don't even know you've developed them. It's a coping thing. You've done it to survive your classes, to pass and get through your classes. But these are things that get in the way typically and will cause problems for people as they try to listen effectively. These are bad habits, things that get in the way. The first is called preoccupation with self. Instead of being other-oriented in the conversation, in the relationship, this person is focused on their self. We would say they're self-centered in the relationship, in the conversation. They're so concerned about themselves that they're not listening to what the other person is saying. Preoccupation with self. They are self-centered. Usually someone that experiences this a lot, they're usually pretty competitive people. You experience, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but they like to perform well. And to the extreme, they might even see the conversation as a competition, that they've got to do well in this conversation. They're so concerned about their performance and what they're saying and getting a good one in that they're not listening to what the other person is saying. They're not other-oriented. They're not focused on the other person. They are being self-centered. And that's getting in the way of them listening to what the other person is saying. Now, a red flag, a characteristic. Remember, we've talked on and on about how you can't change other people's behaviors, but you can change your behavior. One of the red flags when it comes to preoccupation with self, one of the things to look for, characteristics of preoccupation with self, within yourself, to see if this is going on, it's called rehearsing your responses. This is a characteristic of preoccupation with self. Rehearsing your responses. We catch ourselves doing this. Rehearsing your responses means that instead of listening to what that other person is saying, you want to get a good zinger in. You want to get a good one in. So you're thinking about what you're going to say next. You're thinking about what your next comeback's going to be. You're going over in your head how you're going to get a good one in there. That's rehearsing your responses. The problem is that because you're doing that and focusing on that and your performance in the conversation, you're not listening to what the other person is saying. You're so focused on your response that you're not even listening to them. That's rehearsing your responses. You want to be other-oriented and focus on that other person. Be other-oriented. Number 2 sounds really impressive. The speech, thought, differential. The speech, thought differential. Now, this is a barrier. This causes problems when we need to be listening and listening effectively. The speech thought differential sounds really impressive, but what it means is that our brains can process information. That's the thought part. Our brains can process information far quicker than any speaker can provide it. Our brains process information far quicker than any speaker can provide it. That's the speech thought differential. So the best speaker that you know, the best teacher you've ever had, the best preacher you have ever known, the best speaker that you know can't possibly provide enough information to keep your brain busy. So what happens? What does your brain do when it's not kept busy? Screensaver pop up?
It wanders.
It what?
Wanders.
Wanders. Where does it go?
Anywhere and everywhere.
Anywhere and everywhere. What do we call that? You're sitting here, I'm talking about the test coming up. Has that ever happened to you? You're sitting in class and the instructor's talking about reviewing for the test, going over the information, and all of a sudden you hear that instructor say, so don't forget that, make sure you have that in your notes, it'll definitely be on the test. And you're like, where have I been for the last 5 minutes? You didn't hear any of it. You didn't get, your mind wandered. What do we call that?
Spacing out.
Spacing out? What's the common term for it? You're what?
Daydreaming.
Daydreaming. That's what our brain does to keep itself busy. It does wander. You do space out. You start thinking about lunch, what you're going to do for lunch today, what you've got going on this afternoon, what you did this past weekend. Your brain is going to keep itself busy. That is normal. That's what it's supposed to do. Remember the movie Uncle Buck with John Candy? Have you ever seen that movie? Uncle Buck is kind of a bum, just kind of that black sheep of the family, and he's got to come and take care of his little niece and nephew while their parents go out of town. His sister goes out of town. And there's a part in that movie where the real little girl, she's in elementary school, gets in trouble at school. And Uncle Buck has to go talk to the vice principal, this witch of a lady. She's horrible. And he goes into her office, and this vice principal just going on and on. I think she calls his little niece a ninny or something like that because she keeps daydreaming in class. She's always daydreaming about the craziest things, imagination, always daydreaming. And she just goes on and on and on and start calling the little niece all kinds of names and everything. And Uncle Buck finally stops her dead in her tracks and with some pretty colorful language says, look, I wouldn't be worried about her because she's daydreaming. I'd be worried about the other kids if they're not daydreaming. And that's exactly right. That's true. Our brains, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if your brain is wandering, if your mind is wandering in class. It's keeping itself busy. So what do? How do we avoid the speech thought differential when you're in a horrible 4-week summer class that lasts for 2.5 hours or whatever it is to get material for the test? You've got to stay focused. What do? Well, your book's not real helpful. It says to stay in the here and now, to focus on the now. Well, that's easier said than done. Your brain's going to wander. People develop different techniques and different tricks to avoid the speech thought differential. When I was in grad school, one of the things that I would do, when you're in grad school, and it's still true, I think they've switched them up a little bit, but when I was in grad school, after you were done with all of your classes towards your degree, you were done with all of your coursework, you had to take a series of tests called your comps. You had to go in and take your comps. And you would go into the library, and I think mine started on a Friday. It might have been a Thursday. There were a couple of evenings and then all day on Saturday. And you have to show your ID, and you have to check in, and they take you into this little secluded room, and you take your comps. Well, your comps are made up of every class that you've had towards your degree. if you were there 2 years or 3 years, every single class that you took, every professor submitted, it was either 2 or 3 essay questions. So you had 2 or 3 essay questions from every class that you ever took. If you took it 3 years ago, you still had questions on your comps from that class. They were a bear, and you crammed and you studied for 2 weeks before you took your comps. You had to do it. So what I would do when I would go into class, started my first graduate class, I would, as I took notes, think, okay, by the end of this lecture, I'm going to come up with 3 questions that this bozo might ask me on my comps. Every lecture that I sat in, I would try to come up with 3 questions that he might ask on the comps. As I'm taking notes. Sounds kind of silly, but it kept me focused. It kept me focused on the lecture instead of daydreaming about other things. And it did help me with the comps. I would write down 3 questions. That helped. It kept me there. Now, we have convocation in the fall and again in the spring where we have to go to these meetings and listen to these speakers. Everybody at the college has to go over to the center. We have these presentations. And I do about the same thing in there. I will try to come up with 2 or 3 things that will help me. How can I use this in my job? And I'll come up with 2 or 3 things, and I'll try and list them. And sometimes it's pretty tough. Sometimes I'm struggling to get one, come on, say something important. But it keeps me there. It keeps me focused on that information. Because I know when I get in leadership team meeting, my bosses are going to say, well, what did you think when they said this? Or what did you think about that meeting or that speaker? So people come up with different tricks. Some people will doodle. I'm looking to see if anyone, while they're listening to someone speak, they're drawing all kinds of pictures and they'll get these real elaborate doodles in there. Some people, note-taking helps them avoid the speech-thought differential. If they can take good notes, that doesn't work with me. I've got to have some kind of trick or some technique other than just taking notes, or I find myself, my notes don't make any sense at all to me. That doesn't help me with the speech-thought differential. Some people doodle, some people record the information, a lot of different techniques to avoid the speech-thought differential. It's up to you. What works for you? What keeps you in the here and now? Trying to apply the topic to your life, to what you do at work or to your family. People have different techniques to avoid the speech-thought differential. It's daydreaming. Your brain processes information far quicker than any speaker can provide it. So your brain is going to keep itself busy by day. It doesn't just shut down. It's going to daydream. It's going to wander to keep itself busy. So we have to develop techniques that work for us to avoid the speech-thought differential. What are we on? Number 3. Can you help me out a little bit? Say the word spot 5 times, loud and fast.
Spot, 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 spot.
A little bit louder so they can hear you back there.
Spot, 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 spot.
You're driving in your car, get to the intersection, green light, what do?
Spot.
Spot?
Stop.
Stop? What happened?
Integrate.
You're driving in your car, get to an intersection, green light, what do?
Go through it.
Go, right? Don't you go? Okay, I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself. Say silk 5 times fast.
Silk, 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 silk.
What do cows drink?
No.
Milk. So when I go home today and I drive by those beautiful pastures and I see those big steel tubs out there, they're full of milk. Cows drink water, don't they? Sure. What just happened? What just happened? It's called hearing what we expect to hear. Well, he thinks he's going to trick me. I'll show him. And we predict. That's all that we're talking about. Hearing what we expect to hear is number 3. We predict what the speaker is going to say. You don't really listen. You don't stop at a green light. I know that. But you're predicting. You're kind of one step ahead of me. So you're not really listening to what I'm saying. You're hearing what we expect to hear. Jacqueline and I worked that out before class. Hearing what we expect to hear, predicting what the person is going to say. They use it in commercials all the time. A couple of Super Bowls ago, there was a commercial, was it for Slim Fast or something like that, where the guy's reading the newspaper at the table, and a kiss of death, when wife asks you this, she comes out and says, "Do these jeans make me look fat?" And he's reading the paper, not even and he says, "You betcha," or something like that, you know, not even listening to what she said, and she gets all mad. That's what we're talking about with number 3, hearing what you expect to hear. People, we expect them to follow a script. We're really not listening to what they're actually saying. We're hearing what we expect them to say.
I do that a lot with my kids because they're always fighting.
And they
back
look at you
and
like
forth.
you're nuts, don't they?
And I will fuss at them because what I thought they said is not what they actually
Right.
said, and they're responding like, "Huh."
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like you're crazy. When Mitchell, our oldest son, was real little, I had to stop by, I was running around town, had to stop by the grocery store, get something for Paula. They were with me, he and his cousin, probably 8 years old. You know how kids are in the grocery store, and they were just stressing me out, going crazy. And we're going through the checkout line. And the kids are fussing and everything, and I go through the checkout line, and the checker says to me, this, you guys might not remember this, but he said to me, "Paper or plastic? Do you want a paper bag or do you want a plastic bag?" "Paper or plastic?" I said, "Fine, fine, how are you?" And the boys looked at me like, they just started laughing. The checker looked at me like I was on drugs. But he didn't follow the script. He's supposed to ask me how I'm doing and then ask me if I want paper or plastic. That's hearing what we expect to hear. You walk by that person's desk every day, they say the same thing to you every day. We really don't listen to what they're saying. Have you ever walked by someone and said good morning to them and they say, "Fine, I'm fine, how are you?" And I didn't ask you how you were doing, but that's what they expected you to say. We miss a lot when we don't really focus, when we don't listen, we predict. It's kind of lazy listening, predicting what the person is going to say, instead of actually focusing on what they are saying. Number 4, these are barriers, these are bad habits. Offensive listening. Offensive listening. In football, what's the objective of the offense? What's the offense supposed to do?
Stop the ball.
It's supposed to what?
Or score.
Score points, right? That's what the offense is supposed to do. That's the object of the offense. That's what they're designed to do. Offensive listeners are a lot the same way. And you probably know these people. Offensive listeners, they're like vultures sitting in a tree, or sharks circling around you. They're listening, but they're listening to hear you make a mistake. They cannot wait until you mispronounce a word, or you use poor grammar, or you say something incorrect, and they have to make a big show out of it. They've got to correct you. They're showing everyone how smart they are by putting you down. That's an offensive listener. They're really not listening. They know what you meant. They're really not listening to what you're saying. They're waiting for you to make a mistake, mispronounce a word, or use poor grammar, and then they've got to really show off, make a big deal out of it by correcting you. Now, some people that are really bad offensive listeners take this to the extreme. They'll correct you and they'll be wrong. They're trying to show everyone how smart they are, and they're wrong in their correcting of you. That's pretty extreme offensive listeners. They're like vultures sitting in a tree just waiting for you to make a mistake. And it's all about motivation. You know, some teachers, maybe your parents or a coach or whatever, will correct you to help you out. Their motivation is positive. They want you to improve. They're trying to help, not the offensive listener. The offensive listener is trying to build themselves up by putting you down. It's all about motivation. They want to look smarter than you, and they do that by correcting you, making a big show of it. That's offensive listening, like vultures, just waiting for you to make a mistake. Number 5 is called friend or foe fallacy. Some textbooks refer to this as the friend or foe factor. Friend or foe fallacy or friend or foe factor. What's a foe? F-O-E.
An opposing person, somebody that opposes your.
All right, someone that opposes your point of view.
I said enemy.
Enemy, that's a foe. Good word, enemy. Someone that opposes you, your opinion, whatever. That's a foe. What's a fallacy?
Logical reasoning.
Yeah, it's illogical reasoning. It's something that we think is true, but it really isn't. We may believe that it's true, but it really isn't. The friend or foe fallacy happens all the time. Happens to all of us, I think. The friend or foe fallacy is that we listen better, but let's use effectively. We listen more effectively to people we like, people we agree with, people that agree with us, our friends. We listen more effectively to them. Now remember, that's the fallacy. And I've had professors in college that preach that you listen more effectively to people that agree with you, people that you like, people that you like. In fact, I had one professor that said in class that we listen more effectively to people that are similar to us. Now think about that. We listen more effectively to people that are similar to us. So that means if you go into, if that's true, that means you go into a college class and that instructor, that professor, is from another culture, has a different accent than you do, was raised differently than you are. You're not going to listen effectively to that person. Can you see where that would be an issue, a problem for an effective listener? Because if that part is true, that we listen effectively to people that we like, people that we're friendly with, people that are similar to us, then the opposite of that, or not the opposite, but the other part of that must be true as well, that we don't listen effectively to people that are different than we are, that we disagree with. That can cause some real issues. You're going to have teachers that are very, very different than you are, that come from very different backgrounds. You're going to have bosses that come from different backgrounds, different cultures. You have to, as an effective listener, be able to listen effectively to everyone, whether they're similar to you, whether they agree with you or not. You are going to have to listen effectively to everyone. Now, part of the friend or foe factor says that if you like them, if you agree with them, you give them the benefit of the doubt all the time. Well, what they really meant to say, I know what they meant. That you make excuses for them if you like them. If you don't like them, they can't say anything right. If you disagree with them, you'll find something wrong with everything that they say. Now let's use an extreme example. I'm trying to think of someone that's gotten in trouble recently. We'll just use Rush Limbaugh because he's easy. Rush Limbaugh, Hillary Clinton could say good morning, and Rush Limbaugh is going to find something wrong with it, right? Because they're on different ends of the political spectrum what their beliefs are. That would be a result of the friend or foe factor. Because I don't like them, because I don't agree with them, they can't say anything right. Rush Limbaugh, I'm trying to think of someone that he does like. He didn't get along with George Bush very well. I'm trying to think of someone that he does look up to or respect. Maybe Ronald Reagan, and he's been fairly critical of Ronald Reagan too. But if we flip that around, Ronald Reagan could say no wrong, because they agree with him, because we're similar in our beliefs. Can you see where that would be a problem? As effective communicators, we need to listen well We need to listen effectively to everyone, whether they're similar to us or not. In fact, if there's any truth to this friend or foe factor, the really good listeners that I know, the really effective listeners that I know, it almost flips this around. That if they're in a situation with someone that comes from a completely different culture, has a completely different background, boy, they really zero in on that. They love that. It's an opportunity to learn, to hear new ideas, to hear new things. So they really focus and listen very effectively to people that are different than they are. Friend or foe fallacy. We should listen effectively to everyone, whether they agree with us or not, whether they're similar to us or not. Listening effectively, being polite, being courteous, being respectful, does not mean that you agree with what they believe in. You're still going to benefit from listening and trying to understand, processing what they're saying. Remember, this is the barrier. This is the obstacle. I tried to figure out a way to word this one after reading your chapter, and I'm just going to call it early judgment. Your book says premature evaluations or something. It says to postpone judgment as long as you possibly can. Delay evaluation or postpone judgment as long as you possibly can. Give the person a chance. Making early judgments, I'm not going to get anything out of this. Look at that clown. He's not going to tell me anything. We make early judgments and we tune out. We don't listen effectively. Your book is saying to postpone judgment as long as you possibly can, to delay evaluation as long as you possibly can. Give the person a chance. Now, notice that they're not saying don't judge or don't evaluate. We will. I mean, we're human. We have our preferences. We have our own prejudices and biases, things that we like, things that we prefer. We're going to make judgment. What the book is saying is to put it off as long as you possibly can. Give the person a chance. What I like to say is to assume, to go into the situation, whether it's my awful boring convocation meetings that I have to go to, whatever it is, assume that there is value in what the speaker is saying. And that's how writing down those three things helps me. It helps me do this. I'm going to go into that situation, even though I've got a pretty good idea it's going to be boring. I'm going in assuming that I'm going to get something out of it. That there's something that this guy is going to say that's going to help me. There's something that she's got in her notes that I'm going to benefit from, and I'm going to find it. I'm going to find three things that are going to be helpful to me. Assume that there's value in what the speaker is saying. And let me tell you something. It doesn't matter if that speaker is a custodian. It doesn't matter if that speaker is a bartender. It doesn't matter if that speaker is a secretary. It doesn't matter if that speaker is a math teacher. Assume that there's value in what they're saying. And I emphasize that because so many of the great truths that I've learned in my life have come from unexpected sources, from people you wouldn't expect to have an insight from secretaries and from custodians and from way too many bartenders. I've gleaned something, I've learned something from them. Always assume that there's value in what the speaker is saying. Be respectful. 7, 8, and 9 on this list, 7, 8, 9 are very important vocabulary terms. They're going to show up a couple of different times on the test. Don't get them mixed up. Be able to define 7, 8, 9. Be able to define them and tell them apart. Number 7 is called leveling. Leveling. A good keyword to help you remember leveling is editing. Editing. Leveling, we do this all the time. It happens a lot with gossip. Gossiping and hearsay, spreading stuff around. Leveling is when you edit the message. You shorten the message. And it's typically done so that you can pass it on easier, so that you can tell somebody else the story. That's leveling. You shorten it. You edit the message. You leave parts out, typically so you can pass it on. Happens a lot with gossiping and hearsay, secondhand information. It's leveling. You shorten it so you can pass it on easier. Ever play the game telephone when you were a kid and you get in a big circle and you whisper and it's a big long message at the start that goes all the way around the circle, and at the end the message is never or very rarely even close to what it started out as? That's leveling. Leveling takes place when you play that game telephone. Don't confuse leveling with sharpening. Sharpening, a good keyword would be highlighting or emphasizing just a part of the message. Highlighting or emphasizing a part of the message. And your kids are really good at sharpening, I'm sure. You can give them a half-hour-long lecture and they just hear one little part of it. Yes, you can go spend the night at your friend's house, but before you do that, you've already lost them. They heard that first part and they're gone. That's sharpening, where they focus on just one part of the message. In college, they emphasized to me as a speech teacher, wanting to be a speech teacher and training to be a speech teacher, not to say in conclusion in your speeches. Once you say in conclusion and they hear that, you've lost the audience. They're done. The speech is over with. They only focus on that one little part. Now, people are really good about doing this in speeches. Again, we get back to the friend or foe factor. If someone they don't like, they don't agree with, is giving a speech, they'll zero in. Well, a lot of times they'll say they took it completely out of context. They zero in on one part of that message. The sound bites that the news services use would be sharpening, where they just pluck part of the message out and focus just on that part of it. That's sharpening. It's highlighting or emphasizing. Number 9 is called assimilation. Assimilation. Any Star Trek fans in here? Watch Star Trek. In Star Trek The Next Generation, they fight the Borg. And the Borg are like half robot, half mechanical, and half biological, human or alien or whatever. And when the Borg attack a starship or a space station, they always say the same thing. Remember what it is? Resistance is futile. Surrender and be assimilated. Has nothing to do with this. Actually, it kind of does. Assimilation, what we're doing just like the Borg. When we assimilate a message, we bend and we twist and we turn and rearrange that message so that it becomes what we want it to be, so that it says what we want it to say. Assimilation is interpreting a message so that it works for us. Interpreting a message. You bend it, twist it, and turn it, and rearrange it so that it says what you want it to the Constitution. People can read that Second Amendment and bend it, and twist it, and turn it so that it's convenient for them and what they believe in. That's assimilation. When I was in Kansas, I was chair of the broadcasting department. We had a young guy who was about to flunk out of the broadcasting program. He was about to flunk out of school. He had missed a lot of classes, bombed his test because he hadn't been in class, and he had missed a couple of shifts at the radio station, which he didn't do. I mean, that was part of what your expectations were. So as chair of the program, I had to call this guy in and give him the talk, you know, before he's kicked out. We have to have a conference and everything. And I called him into my office. He walks in, and we close the door. He sits down, and I said, look, you know, you could be one of the best broadcasters that we have in this program, but you've really dropped the ball. You've done this, 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 and this. If you don't straighten out here pretty quick, you're going to be bounced out of the program. You'll be dropped out of the program. And we went through, and I made a list for him of 5 or 6 specific things that he had to do to stay in the program. We talked for maybe a half an hour, probably pretty close to half an hour. When we were done with the conference, when we were done with the talk, he gets up and goes out of my office, pulls the door closed behind him. And I got up and opened the door back up. I didn't want my office door closed, so sit down. He goes around the corner of the hallway and into the next door, into the radio station where one of the students is working on the computer. And I hear that student say to the guy that just left my office, hey, what did John say to you? What did John want? And the student that just left my office said, John told me I could be the best broadcaster in this program. Is that leveling, sharpening, or assimilation? What did that student do? Sharpening? Did those words come out of my mouth? Yeah, I said those words. And I'm sure when he got home, that's what he told mom and dad on the phone that night. Did he leave out a lot?
Yeah.
Did he focus on only one part of the message, a very, very small part of the message? Absolutely. These three are not independent of one another. Very often, we will use leveling and sharpening in order to assimilate a message, to twist that message so that mom and dad don't get mad at us, so that we can show off for our friends, so that it will communicate what we want to communicate. We will use leveling and sharpening very often to assimilate a message. These are very important vocabulary terms. They're going to be on the matching, they'll be in the fill in the blank. You need to know and be able to tell them apart. Leveling is shortening, it's editing. Sharpening is highlighting or emphasizing just a part. And assimilation is interpreting the message, bending and twisting and turning it into what we want it to be. Okay, number 10, the last one. Now this is the barrier. This is the negative behavior. It's ignoring mixed messages. Do you remember last chapter I used the term mixed message? Do you remember what it was? What a mixed message is? I said it last chapter. A mixed message is sometimes called a contradictory message. A contradictory message or a conflicting message. They all mean the same thing, and textbooks will use them interchangeably back and forth. A mixed message, a contradictory message, a conflicting message. The negative behavior is ignoring the mixed message. Your book says an effective listener never ignores a mixed message. The definition of a mixed message or a contradictory message, a conflicting message, is when the nonverbal contradicts the verbal. Remember when we said that last chapter? When you're saying one thing, but doing something else. Remember that? Which do we tend to believe? Which is most trustworthy? Nonverbal. We tend to trust, we tend to believe the nonverbal. So a mixed message is when the nonverbal contradicts the verbal. Contradicts the verbal. You're saying one thing, but you're doing something else. You're saying one thing, but you're doing something else. Your book says the effective listener never ignores a mixed message. They always, an effective listener will always confront the mixed message. They bring it to the person's attention. They ask questions about it. Wait a minute, you're saying this, but then you go and do that. I don't understand. Which is it? What do you confront it. You ask questions. You ask for clarification. The effective listener never ignores a mixed message. The effective listener will always confront the mixed message and ask for clarification. They'll nail the speaker down. Whoa, wait a minute. You're saying this, but then you go and do that. I'm not sure what's going on, what you're telling me. Those are the 10 barriers or obstacles to effective listening. 10 barriers or obstacles. We are almost done. Let's take a 10-minute break and I'll finish up this chapter. Come back at 11. We're almost done. Up stuff that I want to do on information that they have at the end of the chapter on listening. Your book talks about the techniques of active listening. And I want to kind of clarify a little bit on the techniques of active listening. We've really already talked about this, but I want to clarify a couple things. Your book talks about the techniques of active listening, and in one of those sidebars, it gives you 3 techniques of active listening. Asking questions, reflecting back the speaker's meaning and feelings of meaning, and paraphrasing. And those are very, very good techniques of active listening. But I want to emphasize that those are not the only techniques of active listening. A technique of active listening is defined as anything that you do, you as an individual, you as the individual student, anything that you do to help you listen more effectively. Anything that you do that helps you listen more effectively. So when I talked about the speech-thought differential and techniques that you have developed over time, a lot of times you don't even realize you're doing these things. But when you're in a difficult listening situation, when you go to that algebra class or whatever it is, and you have to get that information, you need to know that information. There are things that you do, behaviors that you've developed that help you listen better. Some of those techniques may have happened before that listening context, that listening situation. Before you came to class today, there may have been things that you did that help you listen more effectively in this class. Drinking a Mountain Dew for caffeine, getting breakfast, going to bed early last night, whatever it was. Those are techniques of active listening. If it helps you listen better, it is a technique of active listening. So I don't want you to think that those 3 are the only techniques of active listening. In fact, on your test, do you have it?
What?
On the essay, listing portion of the test,
Uh-huh.
did I ask for 3 or 4 techniques of active listening?
Listening.
3 or 4? So I'm not. 4 techniques of active listening.
Yep.
That I see, I'm not lying to you. Chelsea's got the test right in her little hands, her grimy little hands. I'm going to ask you for
Guys,
4
better not try to
techniques
attack
of
me
active
after
listening.
class.
There's 2 ways that I can think of to get that wrong. There are 2 ways for you to get that question wrong on the test. You can give me any of the 3 that are in the book. I don't want ask questions. I don't want reflect back to the speaker. And I don't want paraphrasing. They're great techniques. They're very effective. But I don't want those 3. Anyone can copy them from the book. What I want, I asked for 4 techniques of active listening. I want you to think about 4 things that you do as an individual. 4 things that you do that help you listen more effectively. Now, like I said, you have these behaviors. You have these techniques that you've developed. They're in the back of your mind. They're subconscious almost. You don't even think about it. I want you over the next day to move them to the front of your mind. Think about difficult listening situations that you've been in, classes that you've taken, meetings that you've gone to. Those types of things that are difficult, but you really need to listen. What do you do that helps you listen more effectively? If you tell me that helps you listen more effectively, I can't mark it wrong. That's what I meant when I said there's only two ways that you can get it wrong. You can give me any of those three that are in the book, or you can leave it blank, and you'll get it wrong. But if it helps you listen more effectively, that, for you, that's a technique of active listening. Okay? So you'll have to think about that overnight. What do you do that helps you listen more effectively? My whole objective is to make you aware of that. So when you encounter a difficult listening situation, when you're going into a difficult listening situation, you'll know. You'll be aware of what things you do that help you listen more effectively. Those are techniques of active listening, or effective listening, active listening. One of the techniques that they talk about in the book is paraphrasing. And paraphrasing is a very, very powerful technique. Very, very effective technique of active listening. Paraphrasing. They mention it a lot in this chapter. Paraphrasing is repeating back, and this next phrase is very, very important. Repeating back in your own words your understanding of the message. Repeating back in your own words your understanding of the message. Repeating back in your own words your understanding of the message. The reason I said that phrase, in your own words, is very, very important. That's what makes paraphrasing effective. For you to repeat back a message in your own words means that you have to process it. You have to think it over. You have to rearrange it and put it in your own words. So it helps with remembering. It helps with understanding. Very, very effective technique of active listening. Repeating back in your own words your understanding of the message. Now, don't confuse paraphrasing with what we call echoing or parroting. Echoing or parroting. Now, echoing or parroting can be a technique of active listening as well, but it's a lot more limiting than paraphrasing is. Echoing or parroting is repeating back exactly what you heard. Paraphrasing is repeating back in your own words. Echoing or parroting, like the bird, a parrot. Echoing or parroting is repeating back exactly what you heard. Now, echoing and parroting can be effective if we're talking about content information. Remember content and relationship information? Echoing and parroting can be helpful with content information. Content information, you remember, is facts and figures and numbers and data and percentages. In other words, if someone gives you their email address, you want to make sure you got it right. You don't paraphrase it back. You repeat it exactly how you heard it. Or a phone number, or a password. You would parrot it back. You repeat back exactly what was said to you. And it's helpful with content information, but you don't have to do a lot of processing. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to remember it, comprehend it. With echoing and parroting, you're just repeating back exactly what you were told. Paraphrasing, you're repeating back in your own words. Now, there are three functions of paraphrasing that you need to know. In other words, there are three ways that paraphrasing is beneficial. Three functions of paraphrasing. And these are kind of long, so I'll go slow with them. Three functions of paraphrasing. And it'll be on the video. We're still rolling, right, Kelsey? Mm-hmm. So if you want to go back and make sure you get it in your notes. Three functions of paraphrasing. These are things that make paraphrasing so effective as a technique of active listening. The first function of paraphrasing is it gives the speaker an opportunity to check the message. It gives the speaker an opportunity to check the message, to make sure they got the message right. that they encoded the message properly. It gives the speaker an opportunity to check the message. So if I'm in class and I say to you, okay, tonight we're going to test over chapter 3, and you say, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to test over chapter 3? I thought we were on chapter 7. And I say, I'm sorry, I just had a brain freeze. I just said the wrong thing. When you paraphrase that back to me, whoa, wait a minute, I thought we were on chapter 7. You said, we're going to test over chapter 3. When you paraphrase that back to me, it gave me a second to check. No, I'm sorry. We are going to test over chapter 7 tonight. When you paraphrase it back to me, it gives the speaker an opportunity to check the message. Number 2, under functions. Paraphrasing gives the speaker an opportunity to check the feelings and emotions communicated. It gives the speaker an opportunity to check the feelings and emotions communicated. Gives the speaker an opportunity to check the feelings and emotions communicated. Check the feelings and emotions communicated. So you come out of class tomorrow, and you guys are all walking down the hall together, and one of you is just going off about that last test. You just blew that last test. I hate this class. I hate this is awful. Rah, rah, rah. And you're just griping and groaning. You blew that last test. And one of you, a classmate, paraphrases back, man, you don't like that class. You don't like that instructor at all, do you? You're paraphrasing back. That's just what they said. They just said that. And it gives them a minute to think, no, it's not that I don't like the class. I'm frustrated with myself. I didn't watch the video. I rushed through it. I didn't take my time with the test. It's my fault. I'm just frustrated with myself. That's not what they said. They said they hated me, they hated the class and everything else. But when you paraphrase that back to them, it gives them an opportunity to kind of do a survey, check, inventory is the word I was looking for. Make sure no, that's not what I was meaning to say. It gives them an opportunity to check their feelings and emotions. It gives the speaker an opportunity to check their feelings and emotions. And the third function of paraphrasing, remember we said since chapter 1 that both people, the speaker and the listener, have a responsibility in the relationship, have a responsibility to make sure the message was communicated as it was intended. Well, number 3, the third function of paraphrasing helps with this shared responsibility. Number 3 is it gives the listener an opportunity, an opportunity to check their understanding of the message. Maybe they didn't decode it properly. Maybe they got mixed up. It gives the listener an opportunity to check their understanding of the message. Gives the listener an opportunity to check their understanding of the message. So you said we're going to take test 7 and 8 tonight? No, that's not what I said. We're going to take 7 tonight and 8 tomorrow night. You just heard me wrong. You got mixed up. It gives the listener an opportunity to check what they heard, what they thought they heard. So those are the 3 functions of paraphrasing. Why paraphrasing is such an effective technique of active listening. Okay, a couple of definitions that I want to get in. Your book mentions back-channeling cues. An effective listener is very sensitive to back-channeling cues, is willing to use back-channeling cues. An effective listener is willing to use back-channeling cues. Get this definition in your notes. Make sure that you have this definition in your notes. A back-channeling cue is a type of feedback. A back-channeling cue is a type of feedback It's almost always nonverbal. A back-channeling cue is a type of feedback. It's almost always nonverbal. Where the listener sends information back to the speaker without exchanging roles. Back-channeling cues are a type of feedback. They're almost always nonverbal, where the listener sends information back to the speaker without exchanging roles. You send information, the listener sends information back to the speaker without exchanging roles. Back-channeling cue is a type of feedback, almost always nonverbal, where the listener sends information back to the speaker without exchanging roles. And this class is an excellent example of back-channeling cues, or illustration of back-channeling cues. You want to get a message to me. You want me to know something, but you don't want to stand up and say anything. You don't want to speak out. I'm going too fast. All right? Does that ever happen? I'm giving notes and I'm going too fast. So what do? Wait a minute, I can tell by your nonverbals that I need to go back over it, that I need to slow down. Those are back-channeling cues. You send that signal to me that I need to slow down. Those are called pacing cues. So think about the kinds of messages that you send to a speaker without exchanging roles. These are the types of back-channeling cues. They are agreement, disagreement. I say something and you agree with me, you kind of nod your head, smile a little bit, or you disagree with what I'm saying and you make a face and shake your head. Agreement, disagreement, understanding, or lack of understanding. And I can tell by the looks on your faces if I need to give another example or I need to go over it again. Did you understand it? I said it's going to be on the test. It's not in your book. I can kind of tell if you got it or not from your facial expressions, your eye contact, those types of things, even some gesturing. 3 is interest. Or lack of interest. This class has been very, very good with this, and it's hard, these summer classes, to stay focused and to stay in tune with what's going on. But you guys have been very courteous and very respectful in the class and have shown interest most of the time. Or you could show lack of interest, where you're on the phone texting or whatever, you're reading something else, you're sleeping. So through back-channeling cues, we can communicate interest or lack of interest. And then the 4th one, and I just said it a minute ago, what was it? Or said this, do you remember what kind of cue that is?
Pacing.
Pacing cue. Yeah. Those are the 4 types of back-channeling cues. Pacing cue is slow down. Whoa, I'm trying to get this in my notes. Or, okay, we got it. We're not stupid, move on. Those are pacing cues. Pacing cues. Those are the 4 types of back-channeling cues. Do you remember iMessages? That was the verbal chapter, chapter 6. iMessages are referenced again here in chapter 7. That was chapter 5. iMessages are referenced again in chapter 7. Do you remember what an iMessage is? Absolutely, when you take responsibility for the message. What they say in this chapter is that a good listener, an effective listener, perks up, really pays attention when they hear the speaker using I messages. When the speaker is saying I a lot, Remember, iMessages show ownership or responsibility for the message. What you're saying, this is mine. I'm not blaming someone else for this. I feel this way. This is what I think. Those are iMessages. They show ownership or responsibility for the message. What your book is saying is that the effective listener, when they hear that speaker saying I, using iMessages, they perk up. It must be important to that speaker. If they're saying I should pay attention to this. I really need to listen to this because it's important to that speaker, obviously. The book references iMessages. Again, I just wanted to make sure that you have that definition in there. Just two other terms. Your book uses the term empathic listening. Empathic listening. Have you ever heard that term before? Empathic or empathy? Heard that before? What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Or does it mean the same thing? What's sympathy?
You can actually understand because it's happened to you before. You can put
Which
yourself-
one's that?
Sympathy.
Okay.
Sympathy is like well, I know empathy is you can empathizing with somebody is saying, you know what, that must be hard. You may not have necessarily been in that situation that other person.
Okay.
has been.
So then what's sympathy? Okay, let's go back so we don't get confused. Empathy, you're on the right track. Empathy is understanding. That's a good key word. And we'll keep that up there. Sympathy involves feeling sorry for someone. Now, empathy, you have to be really careful with empathy, and I have problems with the book's definition of empathy. The book says that empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and feeling what they feel, feeling as they feel. I have trouble with that. Empathy, according to the book, is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and feeling what they feel. I don't like that definition. I don't think it's very practical to us as effective communicators and effective listeners. And I think we can harm the relationship. We can cause some misunderstandings and hurt feelings by assuming that we can feel what someone else is feeling. People are pretty protective of their thoughts and feelings. They don't like someone else saying, I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. You can, as you said, maybe if it experienced something similar, but that's not what the book's saying. The book's saying you feel what that person, you put yourself in their shoes. To me, being an empathic listener means that you allow for the emotion. You realize that the person is emotional. Whatever those emotions are, it doesn't matter. You realize that the emotions are there. You understand that the emotions are there, and you allow for those emotions. We're going to talk an awful lot about that tomorrow. Emotions have a huge impact on the way we communicate with the people around us. The empathic listener allows for that. They understand that. An empathic listener is very forgiving. They don't hold grudges because someone said something when they were upset or said something when they were excited. The empathic listener allows for that. They're very forgiving. They're very understanding. They don't hold grudges. I think that's a lot more practical than saying to feel what someone else is feeling. Yeah, exactly. And misunderstandings and miscommunications. I had a student come up to me a couple of years ago. We had reviewed for a test, getting ready to take a test on Monday. This was when we had Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes. Friday after class, she came up and she said, Ms. Burlew, I'm not going to be able to take the test on Monday. I'm not going to be ready. And I said, what do you mean you're not going to be ready? She said, well, my divorce becomes final this afternoon. I'm just not going to be ready on Monday. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I understand. I said, you're gonna be upset and everything. And she said, upset nothing. I'm going out partying this weekend. I thought I was being an empathic listener, feeling it, and I was completely off base. We can't put ourselves in someone else's head and feel what they're feeling. You make those assumptions and you see what happens. So sympathy is feeling sorry. Empathy is understanding. Empathic listener allows for the feelings and emotions. They're very forgiving. They don't hold grudges. Mindfulness is the last vocabulary term. And I think this is where you're going a minute ago too. Mindfulness is behaving logically. Listen, that sounds kind of silly. Listening logically and rationally.
You said that again?
Mindfulness is listening logically and rationally. Having an open mind, attempting to understand the message with an open mind. It's listening logically and rationally. The best illustration I've ever heard for this came from a student when I was in class talking about this. I had a student, one of my favorites, we still keep in touch. It's been 20 years ago, we still keep in touch. He is completely blind. And I was talking about this in class, and he raised his hand and he said, I've got the perfect illustration. It was, when he goes to a restaurant, he's completely blind. They'll be around the table ordering off the menu, and the waitress will go to everybody. And when the waitress gets to him, and he was obviously blind, the waitress would say, "And what would you like, sir?" So they always yell, "I'm blind, I'm not deaf." That's acting illogically and not rationally in the communication context. That's a very good illustration. People that speak a different language, I've had students that spoke French and students that spoke Spanish, said that Americans are very, very good at, they think that you'll understand them better if you speak English with a French accent when you're talking to that, or English with a Spanish accent is going to help them understand what you're saying. That would be mindlessness, behaving illogically or irrationally. That's mindlessness. Mindfulness is behaving logically and rationally, listening logically and rationally in the situation. Okay, I think those are all the terms that we needed to. Let me look at the key terms at the end of the chapter. You know, the book has different terms for the same thing. Analyzing and attending, empathizing, evaluating, hearing, listening, mindful listening, mindless listening, paraphrasing. See, they use pseudo listening instead of offensive listening. Remembering, responding, supporting, understanding. We covered everything that's on the test. You should be really in good shape for the test. Let's go over the study guide real quick. Did you not get one? And we'll turn, trying to think if it will confuse you if I let you. Let's turn the study guides in, because I'm afraid it's just going to mess you up.